Dragon Ballers, if you're looking to buy Dragon Ball Super or One Piece sealed product, make sure to get 5% off using my link to Mystic TCG down in the description. You can also sell cards to them using their Facebook link, which is also down in the description. Yo, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Welcome back to another video. Now, you'll notice I have a deck list pulled up here, but this video is not formatted like a typical deck profile. The thumbnail and the title are not the way I typically do deck profiles. We are going to go over this red Sin build in this video. This is actually the red Sin build that I posted about a week or two ago on the Patreon when I talked about the revamped Gogeta and Sin builds. I still do think that Gogeta and Sin are the two best red decks, although I will say the margins between each red deck has definitely come a little closer. The margins are a lot less wide. But yeah, I've had some conversations with my teammates, and that's kind of what inspired the idea for this video. Some of my teammates think that red Sin is completely dead, not worth playing anymore. Other teammates like me think the deck is still really strong, worth respecting, and has a lot going for it. So I kind of wanted to just talk about that in this video. Like, we will go through this list here, but there are going to be certain points where I'm going to stop and really kind of get into the weeds of discussion on certain things. And that's where I want you guys to drop in comments below, your opinions on the things I talk about, whether you think Sin is dead or not, what you think about an opinion I have at a particular point in the list. And yeah, we'll just go right into it like that. If you're new, make sure to subscribe. Let's just jump right on in. So starting with the SCR of choice, this actually does deserve a talking point. SSB Vegeta Unbridled Power. I think you have to play this one now, where I think before the hits, when Haze was still available to the deck, I think you could play Radiant Sands, the red-blue SCR, because that was a much more aggressive SCR option, and Haze let you be more aggressive overall. So you can, create your opponent's first 2 life with Haze, and then on the following turn, potentially play the Radiant Sands SCR and start creating them even more. And that card was pretty cool in the red mirror as well, because a 40k battle card was really difficult for either the mirror or the SS4 Gogeta deck in particular to get off the board if they went second. So that was a pretty cool choice. But now that I think I don't want to say less aggressive, but your opponent's going to have more resources to play with now that Haze is gone. So I think you have to play the safer SCR, the one that helps you stabilize a lot better. And I think that SCR slot goes to Unbridled Power. So kind of unfortunate thing for the budget players. But I mean, hey, if all you have is Radiant Sands, go ahead and play that. I just think that this is unfortunately the more optimal SCR for this deck now. Whereas last format, I think there was actually discussion to be had whether you wanted to play Vegeta or Radiant Sands. But moving along, for Beerus, I don't think this really changes much at all. Now, what I do want to talk about are the dragon lineups, and that's with our 6 cracked balls and our 4 Oceanus. We do not have Haze anymore, and Haze is an obvious hit to like the I would say the unfairness factor of the deck. This is why I think Sin is still really good, because it still does all the same things that it did, except hitting you for that double and triple strike crit. That's what I think was really unfair about the deck. But now I think the deck is just really strong because you took away the one really unfair component, but the deck still does all the same thing. So I do think it's still a really strong deck for that reason. But the other thing you lose with Haze is the Awaken component. You've lost 4 copies of a card that fishes for a cracked Dragon Ball on turn 1. And that is kind of a big deal. That definitely lowers your consistency by a decent amount, but it doesn't actually halt the turn 2 Awaken in most cases. And I actually ran into this at Nationals a lot. Like 4 out of my 9 rounds were Sin Shenron, and one of my opponents in particular was actually comboing pretty early, and he would get the 6 Z energy before he actually had 6 cracked balls in his Z energy. And that would allow him to awaken faster. And, he would just search the cracked ball on whatever the next 1-drop he played was. So my point is, you can still awaken relatively early. If you Beerus early, or if you just combo any 5k early, you can still awaken if you don't draw Oceanus. Obviously, you would prefer to draw Oceanus. And maybe that's where Sin has to come down to a clean 50 cards, as where a lot of lists were playing like 54. Because it is a wish deck, essentially, where you draw a lot of cards out of your deck, and you're pulling the cracked Dragon Balls out of your deck as well. So your deck is thinning very quickly. But maybe it's got to be like a 52 or 50 card list just to find Oceanus as consistently as possible. But Awakening isn't really going to be a problem. So if the deck can still Awaken turn 2 consistently, again, it's still doing all the same things it did, just without the critical. So that's why I think it's still a top red pick. But moving along, I hate this card. I hate Supernaturon Shenron. I never wanted to play it in my previous Sin builds, but now it kind of feels like you have to, because of Haze being gone, but also because we need to get value off of SS4 Gogeta Power's connection. playing this card and only playing Oceanus is kind of weird, because at any point, if you don't have Oceanus in your hand, you just don't have a good card to play with a +2 ability. So at least getting like a free cycle from Supernaturon Shenron still feels okay. And again, this is where this is like a 54 card list, so you could always end up cutting Supernaturon, which I am not opposed to, honestly, but I do want to get value off that +2. And I guess, you know, searching for the correct dragon that I need at the right time is a decent option. But one card that I think is actually important in the main board going forward in this format is my King Piccolo's Underling, which is another 1-drop you can play off Power's Connection. It's a little rough sometimes, though, because it gets played in rest mode, so your opponent's able to interact with it. But if you really wanted to play it smart, what you would do is you would use your SS4 Gogeta +2 on a heavy push turn against blue, right? So you'd use the +2 there, play the Maya in rest mode, and it doesn't really matter that it's in rest mode, because that's the turn you're going to be applying a lot of pressure. So with all that pressure, they're not going to be able to alleviate it with a Dimension Magic restanding 2 energy. So yeah, that's the way you want to do it with Mai. I mean, of course, you can still play Mai early and just get a draw out of it in a non-blue matchup, but against blue specifically, hold it until you're ready to go for a big play, if your plan is to play it for free off of the SS4 Gogeta Unison. And then for other dragon stuff, for Nova, this build isn't playing Ice. I mean, I think Nova is just better for consistency, for draw power. I would like to play Ice because having more 1-drop threats is nice, but in the Unison version of the deck, I don't think you can really play Ice Shenron. For Dread Destroyer, of course, for Unfeeling Retribution. Now, again, this is the core of the deck. This is what the deck does. Turn 2 Dread Destroyer, turn 3 Unfeeling Retribution, and that's a lot for a lot of rogue decks to have to deal with. Obviously, the meta can deal with it fine, but actually, SS4 Gogeta going second against Sin, I would say feels pretty rough. You don't have a good way to get Unfeeling Retribution off the board unless you tech specific cards that, honestly, I haven't seen any SS4 Gogeta deck play. Like, you'd have to play a card like Golemite, or a card like Max Power, or a card like Red Realm of the Gods. So, actually, no, Red Realm of the Gods wouldn't do it because that card actually minuses. So, yeah, you have to play some straight-up removal that you probably don't have access to that early in the game. And again, that I have not seen any SS4 Gogeta players play. So I do think Sin is actually pretty advantaged against Gogeta going first nowadays, as where maybe 1 or 2 ban lists ago, I think Gogeta was just an outright more advantaged deck in general. But yeah, this is a really good one. And of course, backing it up with Barrier, a lot of decks are not going to be able to deal with that. You can't smoke this because it's an 8 cost. So that combo is still really good. And I don't know, for me, the Sin players always have the Oceanus, at least 1 in the early game by turn 3. So and that's just Dragon Ball, right? People will draw through their deck so quickly. It's not too unexpected. But yeah, this is what I think is still going to push out a lot of rogue decks. You're just not able to give these cards crit, which, again, alleviates the unfair factor of the deck. But as far as decks still being like tier 1 and strong, I don't think that really changes. But I guess this would be the point where I want you guys to drop in the comments. Do you think Sin drops from tier 1? Let me know. But anyways, moving along. 2 Raid Shenron, going with the Z leader. I think makes perfect sense. 2 Golemite. Now, this is a card that quite possibly doesn't have to be here if we're expecting Sin to fall off a little bit. Like, if I was to go to a Nationals in this current format with the current ban list, am I expecting to play against 4 Sin like I did in actual Nationals? I don't know. I still think that there are going to be red players out there because, I don't know, Red and Dragon Ball Super seems to be an identity where it has hardcore, like, players who will never let the color down. So, if you're a hardcore red player, what are you playing? Are you playing Gogeta? Are you playing Sin? Are you moving on to maybe, like, Spaceship GT Goku? That's another one. Let me know in the comments below about that. But if you're not expecting a lot of Sin mirrors, you probably don't want to main Golemite. And it is a little bit awkward when your opponent can give the Sin barrier anyway. But yeah, it's still, you still have still want to have the removal, I should say. But yeah, if you're not expecting a lot of Sin mirrors, you can just drop this. 2 Broly Crown, of course, awkward to play when you can't play it for free, but we still do want to punish blue and yellow decks that are going to be holding energy open. 1 Yamcha, because that's all we can play with our Unison. 2 Wolfang Fist for testing the opposition. Probably just the best defensive card you can play in this deck, simply because it doesn't cost energy. Violent Rays, I still think is pretty good. It's good in the mirror. Stops your opponent from swinging with multiple 8 drops, of which they can drop 2 on their Z leader turn, so that's a big deal. It's also very good against Crimson as well, because if they don't have 5 energy for Golden Avenger, this stops a lot of their stuff. This stops their SCR, this stops their Dark Broly Overwhelms, this stops a fair amount of stuff that they want to be going in on you with in the end game. And then 2 Beerus Ball, make sure you stop those riposts, stop those various types of floodgates, and then 1 Ultimate Dragon Quake, the second SCR on this deck, which is actually the SCR killer because it temporarily warps a card, but if that card you warp is an SCR, then it doesn't really matter. So then just going down into the Z deck real quick, this is pretty standard, not much changes here. 1 Defender of Life, 4 Rush Attack, 1 Z Leader, and 1 Surmounting the Impossible. But yeah, I think I hit all the points I wanted to talk about with this deck in particular. So the question that remains is Sin dead? Or is Sin still tier 1? Or is it maybe Rogue at this point? I don't know. I mean, I still think red is a top color. I think green is rising up in the ranks. I think black is also rising up in the ranks with the Supreme Kai support. So maybe every color is just equally playable. Maybe blue stands a bit above the rest. That's kind of just my speculation right now. But this deck has been doing well in testing. It's been doing absolutely fine. Like, it doesn't win every single game because, again, that unfairness factor has been removed. But it still applies a ton of pressure. It's kind of like a Storm deck, to be honest. If you remember from the blue-yellow Storm days, it is a Storm deck in the sense that it doesn't untap energy, but it plays very efficient threats. And if you go first and or your opponent doesn't have the appropriate cards to deal with your onslaught, they're just in a bad spot. So yeah, let me know in the comments below. What do you think? Is Sin dead? Is it still good? Is it Rogue? Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching, guys. If you want to support, if you want to buy any of the cards in this video, my TCG player link is down in the description. I would really appreciate it. But anyways, I'll talk to you guys in the next video.